the API architectures for the modern enterprise. My name is Dinesh Chandrasekhar. I'm the Director of Product Marketing at CA Technologies. Joining me today on the presentation is Jamie Ryan. He's the Senior Director for Technical Strategy at CA Technologies. And this topic is kind of near and dear to our hearts because this is happening today. This is the day of the digital enterprise, and everybody's like moving towards mobile and IoT, and architecture talking to us day in and day out about how do we extend the existing legacy infrastructures, environments, integration architectures to go and reach out into the digital enterprise. And so that's what we're going to be talking about today. We have a Q&A session at the very end of this webinar, so definitely feel free to type in your questions as we go along the session into the chat window or the Q&A window, and we'll be addressing them at the very end. There will also be a recording of the session as well as a presentation copy that will be sent out to all the attendees tomorrow. So let's get started. As for the agenda today, we will be talking about what does a digital enterprise actually mean. What is this new age that we are talking about? It's not just about mobile and IoT, but what more does it actually comprise? What do you need to be aware of if you're not ready there yet? As well as talking about the weaknesses of the legacy integration models that we have today in current enterprises. How do we identify them? What weaknesses are those, and how do we resolve them using newer architectures? And specifically, we'll be focusing on a few use cases. We have handpicked a few industry verticals, and we're going to be talking about those. And those use cases might be kind of near and dear to your hearts, because these are things that you may be familiar with, and so we'll be addressing those. And we'll talk about new strategies. How do we address these existing use cases in newer digital enterprises? How do we address them, and how do we overcome these challenges? And we'll be giving some imperatives as well at the very end about next steps. How do we go from here? What are some of the next steps that we can potentially take? So let's talk about that. So what does it actually mean when we say that this is the digital enterprise or the day of the digital enterprise? We talk about the age of the customer. I mean, today we see at least one or two mobile devices in almost everybody's hand. We as a consumer, when we work with any enterprise, any industry that we are dealing with, we are dealing with either using a mobile device or some kind of a form that is not traditionally the case, or that has not been traditionally the case given a few years ago, where the browser was probably the most given go-to form factor for accessing or digitally accessing a business. But in today's age, the customer is kind of like the primary important stakeholder in all of this enterprise. So talking about the age of the customer, so the customer is the most important stakeholder in today's enterprise businesses. And so, we want to see how this is traversed over the years, right? I mean, we talked about the age of manufacturing, age of distribution, age of information, where PCs and supply chains may basically drove the whole 9 yards, with companies like Amazon thriving at that time. And then the age of the customer. This is what we are dealing with today, where everybody is obsessed about the customer. How do we better reach out to the customers? Because the customer is now having information access through a variety of different ways, not just like in the internet through the browser alone, but also through mobile devices in every form factor. So which means now you need to be able to grab the attention of the customer without losing them to a competitor, but at the same time be able to engage them, which is what is more important. So in order to be successful in this particular age of the customer, what does an enterprise have to do? There are 4 key business drivers. One is transform the customer experience. It's no longer a customer walking to the retail store or dealing with you over the internet and saying, okay, I need to purchase this product. It's not just that. It is about beyond that. What else can you make sure that the user experience is so unique and so powerful that they want to come back to you over and over again? How do you retain that engagement is what is going to be very important. Accelerating your digital business. Again, this is not just about doing business over a browser window, but it's about beyond that, where you can reach out to the customer in all forms and ways that they are able to stay engaged, and your digital business is like booming beyond the browser. So mobile devices, cell phones, tablets, whatever be the form factor, you should be able to still reach out to them and accelerate it. And embracing the mobile mind shift. So the applications that you design, that the data is provided over, the delivery channels that you have should also be very different. It's not just about serving up through your website. And turning big data into business insights, because big data now exists in all forms, like social media data, somebody tweeting that your products are bad should be immediately addressed, because that in turn could roll out to be a much bigger problem if not addressed immediately. So those kinds of harvesting big data, understanding trends, what is more important to the customer, and serving them up better is what is going to transform your business more digitally in this app economy. So we talk about the app economy. What is the app economy? As I said, customer services used to be over the browser. Any given retailer had a website, in the last 10 years. So brick and mortar stores, started phasing out. We saw the trend. But then now that extended beyond that and said, no longer. It's about the application itself. It's about how these data points actually reach out to the customer and make them feel attracted to you, and they come back to you and say, well, I want to do business with you. I want to engage with you and buy your products. And that's what the app economy is going to be about. So it's not just about the web, but it's also about social networks. How do you reach out to your customer through social networks? How do you reach out to your customers through phones and tablets? I mean, imagine today I can buy movie tickets over my phone. I can buy products on Amazon over the phone. I can order air tickets, trips, anything at all using my phone. All that is possible because, I have a connectivity through every single retailer, every single vendor that I need to work with, just using my small mobile device. IoT, similarly, devices that, like the connected cars and the connected home and devices within your home, outside your home that, help you stay in touch with these kinds of, again, vendors, and in being able to, control your day-to-day activities just with simple devices like that, wearable computers like Fitbits and all that. Everything, they all matter in terms of, driving how your customer experience is going to be. So within the application economy, if you look at it, there are only two things constant, right? One is the set of applications that you provide, and the other one is the identities that the consumer has, and these are various forms. Like this could be your typical customer, the consumer that, consumes your products. This could be a partner. This could be any one of those stakeholders that you deal with on a day-to-day basis within the enterprise. But the nature of how these applications serve up to those different identities is through a variety of different devices. So the omni-channel access of not being just the browser, but also mobile devices, IoT devices and whatnot, and other forms of smart devices, everything. Helping you with customer engagement, with big data, serving up, insights, valuable analytics into how the customer is actually using your products or wanting to, deal with you as a vendor, as well as, the developer ecosystems, because this is going to be one of the fundamental things within your digital enterprise when we talk about the application economy, because the developer is now empowered so much that you want to be able to, treat them with more favorable, usable APIs or the interfaces that you provide through your applications, that the developer wants to create newer ecosystems, newer applications that tend to work with your businesses more easily. This is, proven over and over again with the successes of Salesforce.com, Force.com, and all that, where the interface is so simple that people can create applications and throw it up on the PaaS platform and be able to work with their businesses smoothly. Social logins, again, the social data, mobile, everything, right? It's all about the mobile angle of it and how fast you can accelerate your apps to get to your customer. And then the cloud services, everything is as a service these days. And so whatever applications you create should be able to be served up through the cloud as well, so that the consumers are able to quickly access it. And the one thing that connects everything between the applications and the identities is APIs, right? I mean, APIs are the notion of being able to serve up how you are able to easily interface your consumers to your backend applications through these simple interfaces called APIs. So in the new application economy, the identities or the devices, different consumers that we have, they need to be using multiple devices, right? I mean, they would probably use their iPads, iPhones, Samsung, Android devices, whatever be it, but still be able to securely access those applications. And the keyword is securely, because this is about consumer data we are talking about. So security is of utmost importance here, because we are talking about consumer information, privacy, all the good stuff. And through those APIs to obtain the data from the enterprise. So this is what is going to drive how the new models or the new forms of digital enterprises, how they function, is going to work. That's what is critical to understand within the new application economy. So how do we solve this, and how do we address this, or how do we look at it from an architecture standpoint? Focus on APIs. This is a given. I think most of you on the call today probably already understand this, and I just want to make sure that I re-emphasize that if you are already not on the path of thinking about APIs, you should be thinking about how do I look at this architecture and how do I reposition this in terms of APIs, whether you're dealing with partners, developers, mobile applications, cloud services, Internet of Things. APIs are going to be your single central way to kind of smoothly interface your enterprise data with all those different entities, whether externally or internally too. This picture probably doesn't even show you the internal APIs too, but that's again going to be a very important aspect of looking at your architecture. So in terms of talking about architectures, there are two evolved roles in the new digital enterprise. I mean, you may be an enterprise architect today on the call, but you will also notice that the way you look at architecture today has transformed you into looking at customer experience and operation excellence as core focus areas in today's digital enterprise. So the digital customer experience architect, which is a new role that has evolved, is focused around architecture strategy purely around the customer lifecycle. How do I bring on board a customer? How do I engage the customer? How do I keep them on? How do I make sure that they buy more, they come back? So the architecture needs to be in such a way, designed in such a way that you focus on the customer experience more than the actual product itself. And talking about a product, it's about the digital product. It might be about the application. It might be the application that is served up through the web, through the mobile device and all that. But it is about guiding the enterprise to focus more around the customer-facing technology choices rather than saying, okay, this is what we do within our enterprise. And on the other end, which is on the back end, it's about operational excellence. When we talk about a plethora of devices accessing your enterprise data, as well as thousands of consumers, you want to have operational excellence, making sure that it is able to scale up dynamically to the needs of this kind of a vast and wide range of consumers. So how do you create an agility strategy that quickly transforms new business models into these kinds of IT systems or applications that can serve up your consumers is going to be the challenge of the operational excellence architect. In terms of key business drivers, if you look at the 6 business drivers here, they translate very easily into an initiative that are listed out on the right here. And every business driver is kind of attached to an initiative. I mean, if you look at improving business agility, how do enterprises improve business agility? By connecting key applications to enterprise data. The moment you do that, there's so much data visibility, there's so much data access that you can quickly enable your consumers to access and understand how your enterprise is, what the products are available, how do I deal with this particular enterprise. So you're quickly making sure that your consumers are able to work with your business really easily. Optimizing user experience on the device of their choice, decouple the business logic from the mobile app. Why does that have to be tied into that? So the moment you do that, again, gives you greater agility. As you go through each one of these, you will realize that the key notion here is that it's about APIs, right? I mean, every single business driver here that is connected to the initiative can be purely driven through the concept of APIs and how they can independently function and empower the developer to create newer systems that can empower the consumer, which is what is the ultimate goal. So in terms of weaknesses for legacy integration models, let's talk about this because this is going to be the key topic for today, and we want to understand what weaknesses exist and how do we kind of transition them or tie them into newer systems, newer architectures that center more around APIs. When we talk about the notion of enterprise service bus, an ESB or an integration platform, this model was originally developed for on-premises systems and predominantly huge behemoth of systems like SAP and Siebel and PeopleSoft and whatnot. So given the days of those kinds of enterprise apps that were immensely huge, which are still today, but they exist behind the firewall, on-premises and all that, the ESBs kind of made the way to tie in those systems into other systems within your enterprise. And the reason being that these on-premises systems had proprietary formats in terms of not only how they structured the data, because there was no standard database that they would tie into. SAP had its own internal structures and all that. The fields were not readable, lots of complexities. And the fact that the interfacing itself had very custom proprietary formats, whether it's RFCs or BAPIs or whatever be it, the need for ESB and an adapter associated with it became very relevant back in the days. But today, if you look at it, even SAP and all these other systems are trying to go onto the cloud or trying to expose APIs or trying to make sure that the customer experience or the developer experience is a lot more easier. So the integration software market is definitely in a state of flux. It is changing because of the forces of the cloud, mobile, big data, and IoT. Because of the nature of that, vendors are trying to see, I don't want to call myself an ESB or I don't want to call myself an integration platform. I want to position this as more agile, more flexible rather than a big clunk of software sitting behind the firewall. Scaling up, which becomes even more important when you talk about consumers to the scales of thousands and millions of consumers over mobile devices accessing your enterprise. Scaling up becomes very, very important. How do you handle all those calls coming into your enterprise, and also making sure that security and threat protection is of utmost importance so that you're not being tied down by some kind of a DDoS attack or something like that. SaaS applications, there are hundreds of SaaS applications that are coming up on a day-to-day basis. But when you talk about an ESB type architecture, then you're thinking, oh, I need a connector to connect with each one of these applications that are out there. Well, the notion might be right because that's how ESBs have traditionally been done all along. But when you talk about hundreds of SaaS applications and your enterprise, there are so many enterprises that have at least dozens and dozens of SaaS applications that they deal with in terms of systems of engagement and systems of record even. Given that, it's not a scalable or a sustainable solution to create a connector for every one of those SaaS applications and maintain them. What if the SaaS version or the application version changes? How do you update your connector? How do you keep them up to date? Blah, blah, blah. It's a long and lengthy process in terms of sustainability. So, and the fact that most of these connectors today around these SaaS applications are basically wrappers around the APIs that most of these cloud applications expose, it makes it even more easier to understand that you probably don't even need a connector, that you can simply access the cloud application using the API that the cloud application actually exposes. So again, these are some of the challenges that you will typically see as you start working with your integration architecture, and you realize that we need to set the bar differently and talk about how do I create a sustainable solution that is easy to maintain and scale up easily as well. And the last thing I want to stress upon here is flexible security models. And this is a very, very important topic. ESBs are great. Integration platforms are great for internal connectivity, application connectivity, great. But the moment you start talking about even internal stakeholders that are geographically spread out, or even external consumers like partners, even your own consumers that are accessing through mobile devices or something, or some of your enterprise data, it immediately becomes a security challenge. So the notion to instantly create policies, set up security models that can dynamically change based on your business model becomes very, very important. And an ESB is not designed for that. You need a separate product in the front to actually control that. And that's what we're going to be talking about in terms of how it can be addressed. So if you look at a typical ESB architecture diagram, this is what I said. ESB ties in all these applications together, firewall in the front, your consumers accessing it through the firewall, um, traditional proven model, right? But then when you start talking about connectors and adapters, some of the challenges that I explained in the previous slide become very relevant. How many connectors do you create? How many adapters do you create? Do you need a connector for each and everything? Those are all important questions to address from an architecture standpoint. Business logic, again, given the traditional way of doing ESBs, you would probably embed them into either the code or either in the database. You end up in so many different ways. But when you think about extensibility and scalability and wanting to create digital enterprises that change dynamically for the business, then you start thinking about putting your business logic, encapsulating them or separating them or decoupling them into APIs, and that's where it becomes more relevant. Lifecycle governance of APIs, very, very important topic. The moment you start creating APIs, then you will realize that this is of again a very, very important nature to address. But again, ESBs were not designed for that. Security gateway, mobile gateway, and again, this is not part and parcel of an ESB, but this becomes very important when the moment you start thinking about exposing your enterprise data to outside consumers through the firewall. Firewall is designed to do a certain thing, but it's not designed as a security gateway or a mobile gateway, and so you need that as well. And then enablement, mobile IoT enablement, whether it's allowing for devices to access it easily, or just saying that I can push data into those devices. So all that capability is possible through APIs, and that's what your ideal architecture should be looking at. You should be looking at, having an API server or a gateway that allows for all these different entities to interface with, not only just from an external standpoint, but even you could use that for internal interfacing as well. And taking the model of API enablement, makes it a lot more easier. So with that said, I want to hand it off quickly to Jamie and ask him for his subject matter expertise, as an enterprise architect. What are some of the perspectives that an enterprise architect has in this particular regard? Jamie, would you kindly address that?
Sure. Thanks, Dinesh. Welcome, everybody. My name is Jamie. So you can see there are a lot of technical gaps in that kind of ESB-centered diagram, but the technical challenges around solving these modern problems with legacy architecture aren't just a question of technology, but it's a real sea change in terms of customer expectations and business climate. So Dinesh, you started this webinar talking about customers. You said it's the age of the customer, and maybe our listeners today are picturing a person checking out their new Apple Watch, or if you've been to a CA webinar before, you might be thinking of that subway wall in South Korea where you can order groceries with your phone just by pointing at a QR code under a picture of milk. Very kind of retail-oriented end-user customer styles. But part of the age of the customer is realizing that that end user, in these cases some retail customer, or retail consumer, isn't the only customer. So for an enterprise architect, the customers are employees and partners and developers and line of business executives that need to deliver on new initiatives and marketing teams. So these are the people you need to please. It's not just the end user. It's no longer just about governing internal interfaces and delivering an application on your own. It's about opening up those internal resources to people that haven't traditionally had access. So it's about managing not just the interfaces, but also people. People like developers or groups of people like partner organizations that you might be bringing on to build a mobile app for your business. So API management isn't just about exposing an API and counting how many times someone uses it. It's about managing relationships. Relationships between developers and applications and APIs, between service levels and API plans, between monetization strategies and potential revenue. So while API management can tackle a lot of the technical interface challenges that ESBs and other legacy technology is often tasked with, the same can't be said for the other way around. This new paradigm of dealing with API consumers as customers isn't something that ESBs are traditionally good at. So the second point here is a shift in budget. Enterprise architects have always been asked to do more with less over time. It's almost a cliche, but it's not just that budgets are shrinking. is that budgets are actually moving as line of business and marketing execs get greater autonomy about how to deliver their services and campaigns. So developers are becoming strong influencers and even purchasers of technology to help them do their jobs better and more rapidly. And that leads directly to a third concern around agility and time to market. So if the line of business doesn't find what they need to build their applications internally, they're going to go externally. They're going to start signing up for IaaS platforms like Amazon AWS with their credit cards. They'll use personally created accounts to access SaaS solutions to meet their needs. They'll start creating new data repositories in the cloud without any sort of oversight or governance to check for things like privacy compliance or data residency. So now you essentially have a shadow IT department with no governance over what services are being used or by whom, and no more customers as an EA because they've all just created their own backends from scratch. So I'm not saying there's anything wrong with using cloud services, including both IaaS and SaaS, but it needs to be managed. Governance is sometimes looked at as a dirty word by developers today, and they want to avoid it at all costs because it brings back these kind of nightmarish flashbacks of the early days of SOA, 10 different WS security standards that would have to be implemented before you could make a simple service call. But governance doesn't have to be a dirty word. It has to be offset by user experience. So the best governance is invisible governance. And so API management solutions allow IT to provide their own interfaces to third-party services, to manage the relationships with those third parties, including which credentials get used, what level of access they have, how to pay for services without using a personal credit card and tie it to kind of corporate oversight. So you're not imposing any additional burdens on the developers, just the opposite. You're enabling them by providing a centralized directory of available services, both internal and external. You're giving them access to back-end data sources pre-populated with your existing enterprise data, so they don't have to go out and create their own. You're connecting those third-party services to enterprise operations dashboards for monitoring and logging to make sure your applications are healthy end-to-end and that any issues can be diagnosed and resolved quickly. So in the end, you're really catering to your customer needs, those kind of new style of customers that I just talked about. And our fourth point was around security. So Dinesh already talked about this a bit, but concerns around this topic these days are very real and very mission critical. The last webinar I gave a couple months ago was about major security vulnerabilities responsible for public breaches that we're hearing about in the news, and the pretty simple steps that could have been taken to mitigate or prevent those technical and PR nightmares. It was very well received, mostly because the visibility around data and application security is going all the way up the chain in your business. Security is no longer a checkbox to be ticked before deployment goes live in order to get the security team off your back. It's something you have to be cognizant of early and build into your architecture from the very beginning. There's security audits and compliance audits and industry regulations to be concerned with, and there are big questions being asked of IT leaders by CEOs and boards of directors, and this all arises from that shift in who the customer is. The customer isn't an internal application consuming an internal data source through an internal ESB kept safely behind multiple layers of network firewalls and physical data center security. Because these new customers are often external, they're partners or development organizations, we're having to poke holes in the firewall. We're having to open up data sources that haven't been touched by anyone other than a DBA in years. And we're having to expose internal data to employees and partners over the open internet to phone and tablet apps, because no one wants to have to VPN into the network to get access to the data they need in the field. So all of the agility I just talked about in the previous point means a new set of security challenges. But most of these legacy architectures weren't built with security as a first-class citizen. It was an afterthought at best and non-existent at worst. So how do you extend that existing functionality out while maintaining the level of governance and security that's required of the data in question? So that's where these new modern architectures come in. They generally include a gateway that's DMZ ready, that's policy-based, so you don't have to write potentially insecure code sitting out in the DMZ in order to set up things like threat protection and encryption and other PKI operations. And the state can reach out to SaaS applications to securely communicate data and connect to your existing systems that remain within the firewall, including legacy user repositories and legacy applications. So we've talked about some of the functionality that's provided by more traditional architectures that include DSPs or SOA patterns, and also some of the functionality that isn't provided, things like readiness for mobile, relationship management, inbound and outbound cloud connectivity, and integrated but not overbearing security, just to name a few. So how do you put together an architecture that includes them all? So I'll talk about the model proposed for these modern architectures by a leading analyst firm in a few minutes, but I'll give you an unsurprising hint that CA API management solutions do address these needs. So now we can talk a bit about some more specific vertical use cases. So go ahead, Dinesh.
Thank you, Jamie. Yeah, that was very insightful. And I think you're absolutely right about looking at the consumer as not just the end consumer, but more than that. And with that said, I think picking up retail use cases would probably be a really appropriate thing because this, again, is not about just your very end consumer alone, but also about the partners that you work with. It is about the retail stores that you may end up working with as partners. This might be about the distributors where you distribute your products, or the suppliers who send you the products in the first place, and you deal with them on a product line by product line basis. So given all that, how do you expose your enterprise data in such a way that they are able to work seamlessly with you, as well as, again, going back to the topic of customer engagement, how do you retain your customers given the vast competitive nature of the retail industry as is? New customer channels, right? I mean, if you look at retail, the way it is shaped about over the years, it has just gone from going to a store, doing brick and mortar business, to websites, to mobile devices today. And you could pretty much order anything from shoes to whatnot over your phone and get it shipped to your home, as well as do returns and everything as well, very much without actually visiting a store. With that kind of disconnection between the customer and you, how do you retain the customer? How do you make them come back to you over and over again is going to be one of the biggest challenges. And that's where, again, the customer experience angle comes in very, very handy. It's about redesigning your architecture in such a way that you don't think about, can I connect my consumer data to my enterprise data? It's not just looking at data integration, but it is about experience of the customer, and how do you provide that experience by integrating the right kind of applications and providing that opportunity for the customer to work with you. So when we talk about mobile apps, when we talk about how the consumer actually engages with you, consumer information security becomes of utmost importance. This is about privacy. This is about making sure the customer is happy about you. Any particular data breach that has happened, and this is a very common thing that we have seen repeatedly happen, almost every quarter there's one or two big retailers talking about a consumer data breach and all that, right? So we've heard about Target and so many other such retailers who have had that kind of data breach. Now, with that said, enterprise architects need to focus on consumer information security as one of the primary points when we talk about a retail industry use case. How do you make sure that credit card information, consumer profile information, shopping information, their behaviors, everything are retained in such a way that it's not exposed to any third party as well as unauthorized access. Marketplaces are even more challenging. This is about bringing together multiple retailers, multiple people together onto the same place to sell and buy and exchange goods back and forth. And that becomes, again, even more challenging because, again, it's not only about the customer experience, but also about the fact that you are now talking about security. You're now talking about multiple, product SKUs. How do you tie all them together? So there is an integration in there too. So there's a lot of other moving parts that you need to consider when you think about an architecture, again, with the intention of retaining the customer. Store integration and store replenishment are more on the back-end side. You talk about a use case like that. You're thinking about how do I make my suppliers visit my stores, replenish them with goods automatically. And this is where you talk about vendor management inventory and all that. There are ESB implementations that have already done certain scenarios like this, where they would have like an ESB in each store, and again, this could be like one of the clunkiest implementations possible, probably. But I mean, in terms of maintainability and all that. But the fact that you could make it probably a lot more easier in terms of architecture by looking at APIs as an alternative to like doing store integration, store replenishment. Imagine exposing APIs to your suppliers, and your suppliers being able to call that API to understand which stores need what inventory to be replenished, and they could automatically send their ships, the trucks out to like refill them or replenish them. That would be kind of like the more newer way of looking at architectures in the retail context. Manufacturing, again, fantastic use cases of looking at it from an API standpoint. Again, manufacturing is one of those age-old industries that have been around for like decades, and they're used to like optimizing their supply chains. They're used to like making sure how smoothly we can work with our suppliers, talk about lean, Six Sigma, whatnot. But the notion of being able to like optimizing your supply chain is not restricted only to integrating your core supplier systems or core back-end manufacturing systems, but it is also about making sure that the process is very visible between the supplier and you, or between your distributor and you, between the warehouses and you. Making sure all that is like extremely visible becomes a key component of this particular architecture. And with that said, if your partner, if you expose an API in the newer digital enterprise, so that your partners can onboard very, very seamlessly, because that's one of the bigger challenges that most of the manufacturers have with an ESB type of implementation, because there are different data formats, there are different types in how a partner can actually engage with you. Not having a standard basically puts in a lot of challenges in terms of how the partner can actually onboard and how quickly you can get them to work with you. But taking an API approach makes them very easily, and there are a lot of enterprises that have done this kind of an approach using APIs, where the partners can use the API to like sign up, provide the data format that they'll be working with, and be able to like exchange data back and forth almost on an instant basis. And talking about mobile enablement to again get visibility into where your parts are, where your products are, whether your supplier is going to delay any of the products, all that kind of stuff becomes very important, and those again can be exposed through APIs very, very easily. I'm drawing the parallel again over and over again to APIs and your existing way of doing, primarily because APIs provide that level of flexibility in terms of not only automating and integrating and tying these different silos together, but also the fact that you can get visibility and control and management aspects, working very, very seamlessly as well with APIs. And again, parts fulfillment and inventory, you can think about it, right? I mean, similarly how we talked about vendor managed inventory in the retail case, this is about parts fulfillment, where I can just, type into my system saying these are the parts that I need, and the supplier would be able to like automatically, use an API, or the supplier has an API that I can quickly call and, submit a fulfillment order. I can get my parts, shipped out to me. So there are multiple ways how we can look at API architectures, both inwards and outwards as well, in these cases scenarios. For the next couple of use cases in different verticals, as well as talking about next steps and strategies, I'm going to have Jamie kind of walk us through some of the use cases as well as the strategies to address those use cases too.
Yeah,
Jamie, why don't you run with telecom and government use cases?
Yeah, let's talk about telecom. So there's a number of use cases here, some of which are very well known to IT, features like network-based geolocation services to triangulate a user's position based on cell towers, or new channels for content provided by or through the cable company so they can engage people on their devices away from the television, or have them interact with set-top boxes. But let's talk about the business side of things. So these new features all add up to make telecom services more sticky, to increase customer loyalty by providing the most services, by having their apps installed everywhere, and by competing on the user-friendliness of those apps. So you can also provide enforcement of contract terms by measuring usage of various services and features. The telco provider can make sure they're meeting the service levels that they've defined. They see that usage is high in a given location, but the infrastructure is a little light. They can make decisions about future investments that will improve bandwidth or coverage in that area. and whether we like it or not, they can enforce SLAs in the other direction as well if someone's violating the terms of service or overstepping limits on their account, perhaps to download the latest Game of Thrones episode or something similar. And these businesses can also create kind of innovative modes to market through billing, innovative billing features, like the customized video bill that some telcos provide through a third party that they connect with APIs, or they can offer billing as a service for other vendors, so you can be charged via your cell phone bill for things like charity donations. So you ever wondered how the Red Cross gets its money every time you text the number during those charity telethons and donate $10? It's this kind of integration through APIs, and it needs to extend from the telecom network out to the other parties involved. There's personal information, there's other private data. So this provides a service for both the consumer, who only has one bill for a bunch of different purchases, and the partner, who no longer has to work out their own billing system, but instead will use the telco infrastructure. And now let's talk about government. So government's a really interesting use case for these new modern architectures, and I'll talk about what I can without getting into specifics around our customers that have an interest in keeping the details secure. But the first is information security. It's probably pretty clear. I don't think I need to provide much of an explanation. I already talked about potential threats to enterprise data. Now think about what's required when talking about intelligence data or weapons data, secure communications, other private government information. So APIs also enable centralized collection, management, and processing of lots of regulatory information provided by businesses, by taxpayers, so they can accomplish things like produce or drug tracking for USDA or FDA, enrollment and processing of government-subsidized health care, coordination of environmental data for the EPA, those sorts of things. Moving on, what do I mean about tying down information silos? So as you can imagine, there's lots of different governmental agencies at every level: federal, state, county, local, and lots of different classifications of data. So you have a two-pronged challenge. One, how do you get the information between two secure silos? How do you define who has access to a piece of data? How do you get it to them and only them? So how do you communicate between the prosecution, the public defender, and the court system in a criminal justice example, or between a county sheriff and the police department in an adjoining municipality? To make this question even more urgent, what if those silos are different first responder organizations arriving at the scene of a crime or a disaster, or if they represent military units from multiple allied countries performing a joint operation on a remote battlefield out in the field somewhere? How do you map between ranks of different officers in different branches of the armed service, or between our military and an allies? So these are the kinds of tough questions that modern architectures need to solve. So if you're an intelligence agency, not only do you have to protect against data leaking out, but you also have to be very careful about what kind of data you take in. So it's actually very dangerous to ingest data from an unclassified domain like the open internet to a classified domain. So there need to be all kinds of security and bridging technologies between the two silos, and that's something that these modern architectures, especially ours, do very well. And then last, the exact opposite use case from what I just discussed. So in many cases, there's a mandate to expose data from public entities as APIs so they can be part of the public record. This has evolved. Initially, the mandate was share your data. We ended up with a bunch of Excel spreadsheets. So then the mandate changed to expose APIs. So these can be living documents, really ever-changing sources of data that can be integrated into apps for discovery, oversight, epidemiological studies, or just plain curiosity. So how do you make this data as consumable as possible for developers to discover and build applications around? So let's talk about some of those strategies for actually making this stuff available to the appropriate audiences. So here are a few initiatives for enterprise architects that relate to API management technologies that make this modernization process easier. The first is to extend your existing architectures. We're not telling you in any way to go throw out the investments that have been made through the years on an ESB or a SOA architecture or any of the supporting technologies like identity management solutions. Our customers aren't starting from scratch, and they need to take advantage of everything that already exists. Only then can they achieve that agility with their existing data and applications. So that includes legacy apps, data sources, infrastructure. So you need to bridge between these systems and mobile, cloud, IoT. You need to communicate using whatever message formats and protocols are supported by that existing infrastructure, MQ, JMS, FTP, and then define new standard consumable API interfaces for exposure and use by your developers and partners. So you need to separate out the transformation, the mediation, the access policies that need to be enforced upon service execution away from the back-end code, away from the ESB, and have them more centralized and enforced on the way in and out of your new architecture. So when in doubt about what piece of the architecture to use for a given project, this API management infrastructure should be the primary platform for these new digital projects. So when possible, you should use the new architecture to build your applications more quickly and securely. That way you have a single enforcement point, policy enforcement point, and a way of preparing for future technologies and standards that might require some additional support from a flexible platform. So bringing these things up, this might raise the question, what the heck is no ESB? Some of you may have heard of the concept before, don't know what it means. Others probably think they know what it means, but might be wrong. It's often misunderstood. So I actually blogged about this last week, and the blog offers a more in-depth discussion on the subject, but I'll just take you through the highlights. So no ESB is a term coined by Gartner last year to describe a new approach to architecture. It was part of a much larger article that discussed the components and business goals of an API-centric architecture and the somewhat overlapping but somewhat different components and goals of a SOA-centric architecture, service-oriented architecture. And in both cases, the suggestion from Gartner was that the most essential runtime component of the architecture is a service gateway rather than a traditional ESB. So that's the core message behind the no ESB concept. And this gateway, whether it's called a SOA gateway or API gateway, can perform many of the critical functions of an ESB, mediation, transformation, routing, traffic enforcement, while separating out that implementation of the service endpoint from the policies to be enforced on that service. So it allows for much greater deployment flexibility and agility in modifying the architecture and services to meet rapidly changing customer requirements. So what does this mean for existing infrastructure? If you don't want it to have an effect on your existing infrastructure, then it means absolutely nothing. So no one, not Gartner, not CA, is telling you to trash your investment in SOA, in an ESB, in a mainframe, anything like that. In these cases, the gateway and its associated kind of design time API management components would simply extend the existing architecture to new use cases. We might bridge a REST API to a backend SOAP service, or mediate between HTTP and MQ. There's no need to write any new code for the back end, and you're reusing the service that's already been created. So you're reusing assets. But if you're attacking a new project and there's no existing infrastructure for it, then you might want to analyze those requirements and see whether this type of solution, a service gateway-based solution, would meet all of your needs. And you might not have to use some of that back-end infrastructure. So what happens if it doesn't? If you have an existing ESB, it offers functionality that can't be provided in a service gateway. Well, first I'd think about whether that functionality you're looking for really needs to be deployed as part of an ESB. So, for example, there might be a bunch of code that defines business logic, policy enforcement. If the policy is separated out and deployed to a gateway, then do you really need to use an ESB just as a container for your code? Or would it be simpler and less expensive to just put it on a standalone app server? If you need messaging infrastructure, does it really need to be part of an ESB, or can it just be a standalone MQ or JMS server? So if you come up with something that absolutely has to be on an ESB, then by all means deploy it there and use a service gateway as the on and off ramp to the bus. But also let us know what that functionality was, because our solutions are adding capabilities every day. So moving on. Let's say you buy into this API management concept. Where can these systems have an impact? The simple answer is everywhere. So I've talked in webinars before about software-defined everything. The concept similar to Mark Andreessen's quote about software eating the world. Essentially, all layers of the stack are turning into API-enabled software that can be consumed and integrated with other systems as part of an automated process. So you see this in the software-defined networking space, in the IaaS, PaaS, and SaaS markets, in DevOps discussions, in microservices and containerization strategies. So as architects and IT are having these conversations about new architectures, really these are all enabled by APIs. The whole concept of as a service means that the logic is managed by someone else and the interfaces are exposed. So when you're considering how to transform your enterprise into a digital business, there are all these opportunities for APIs. They can provide tools to enable a great user experience, to access business layer logic, to integrate with applications or their underlying infrastructure. And for every API, it can be internal, external, partner-focused, or even exposed by a third-party product. So the possibilities are really endless. So let's once again get back to our initial conceit. This is the age of the customer, and in our case, the customer is you. So how do APIs and API management help you achieve your goals? First of all, they let you bridge your existing technology with all future digital initiatives. It allows those initiatives to access data and legacy application assets more quickly, reuse those systems without having to recode them when the needs for the next mobile app change. But of course, just having the technology won't guarantee a successful transition to the app economy. So what can we do beyond technology? Well, we have a services organization called the API Academy. When they go out and talk to customers, they talk about a four-phase approach that they call API 360, as in a 360-degree view of the issue. So first, you have to align with the business strategy around goals for your digital business initiatives. What are your goals going into it? Then you design your APIs to meet your customer and developer needs. So at that point, the developer is your customer, and you're trying to meet their needs. Then you architect sustainable and consumable APIs that prepare you for the future. And then you select the right API management and security solution to help you achieve those goals. And if you need help with any of that, our API Academy is available, and they represent some of the most respected experts in this field. So you've seen this again. You've seen this before, but now CA API management is providing that secure access to those enterprise resources and data. In some cases, it will be deployed on ESB in the back. In other cases, directed to a data source or another API endpoint. So now you've got the security in place to become a connection break in the DMZ between requesters and the response. So having this centralized point of policy enforcement makes it far easier to manage as well as control and access what data needs to be available to whom. So I won't go through each of these, but you can see some of the other kind of API management needs that we address around enabling app developers, integrating everything, protecting apps and applications, and monetizing and dealing with the business of APIs. So next steps, this wraps up the meat of the presentation. We'll do Q&A in a second. Feel free to continue to answer chat questions, but here's some next steps. So we'll publish this. You'll get a follow-up email. You can download our solution brief on this topic or our integration-focused ebook. And if you want a chance to talk to us and interact with us, you also have that opportunity at API Days in San Francisco. So this is happening on June 17th and 18th, which is coming up quick. It should be a great event. CA is a gold sponsor, and our own Scott Morrison is giving a main stage keynote address. We'll have a booth so you can come by and talk to us or arrange a private meeting on the show floor. We're also having a workshop the following day on June 19th, during which we'll provide demos around the connected life use cases being discussed at the conference. So there we are. I know we're running a little late, so if there are any questions in the chat window, we can answer those, and if not, we can go on from there. I don't see any. Am I missing anything, Alex, Dinesh?
I think we may have one. No.
No questions yet. Okay. Well, then I don't mind running over. Dinesh, any last words? I just want to say thank you guys all for attending. You'll get the follow-up email and presentation links, and come see us at API Days. What's the name of the Gartner report you mentioned? Great question. So it's called Choosing an API and SOA Governance Architecture. It was published last May by Gary Oliff. It's a great piece, very well written. So take a look at our blog, my blog on the API Academy site as well to discuss that more. Anything else? I don't see anything. Great. Thank you, everybody, for joining. Thank you, Dinesh. And we'll talk to you next time.
All right. Thank you all.